My brother Ethan and I decided to take a weekend camping trip in the remote forests of Colorado. Ethan, being the more adventurous one, picked the campsite, planned the route, and took care of most of the preparations. I was just along for the ride, as usual. When we arrived, the location was breathtaking: dense trees, a small clearing for our tent, and complete isolation. We had to hike a few miles to reach it, which meant we wouldn't have to deal with other campers. At least, that's what we thought. The spot wasn't well defined, making it hard to tell if we were even in the right place. There were several small clearings, any of which could have been the designated campsite. We picked one that looked promising and began setting up. Initially, it seemed like no one had been there for a while, but after taking a closer look, we started noticing strange things scattered around: a worn-out hiking boot, a rusted pocket knife, and even an old, weather-beaten backpack with nothing inside. These weren't typical things people left behind at campsites, especially in a remote area like this. It felt off, but we brushed it off and continued with our evening. After a quiet afternoon of exploring the woods and relaxing by the tent, we built a fire as night fell. The air was cool, and the stars were barely visible through the thick tree canopy. We talked, joked around, and enjoyed some snacks. A few hours later, as I was staring into the darkness beyond our campsite, I noticed something strange. A faint, flickering light, another fire, deep in the woods. It was barely visible through the dense trees, but there was no mistaking it. I nudged Ethan and pointed toward the distant glow. He turned to look, his eyes narrowing. "That's weird," he muttered. The light was in a direction where, as far as we knew, there were no official trails or campsites. The idea that someone was camping out there alone, away from any designated spots, was strange. Maybe they just wanted privacy. Still, something about it unsettled me. We tried to ignore it, but a sense of unease settled over me. We stayed up a little longer before putting out our fire and heading into the tent. By midnight, I had fallen into a deep sleep, but something woke me up a couple of hours later. At first, I wasn't sure why I was awake, but then I realized I had to relieve myself. I unzipped the tent as quietly as possible and stepped out into the cool night air. Walking about 50 feet away to avoid attracting animals, I handled my business. But just as I was about to head back, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The distant fire was still burning, but now, between me and that flickering glow, I could see something else. Silhouettes. At first, I thought it was my tired eyes playing tricks on me, but the longer I stared, the more certain I became. There were figures, motionless, standing among the trees. A chill ran through me. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were oddly shaped bushes or shadows cast by the firelight. But deep down, I knew better. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I counted at least 10, maybe 15 of them. They weren't moving. They were just standing there, watching. Panic crept up my spine. I turned and hurried back to the tent, my heart pounding in my chest. I hesitated for a moment before shaking Ethan awake. "Hey, wake up. I need you to see something." He groggily sat up, rubbing his eyes. "What?" he mumbled. I didn't bother explaining. I just led him outside. But before we could reach the spot where I had been standing, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The figures had moved. They were closer now, scattered among the trees at varying distances, still unmoving. I turned to look at Ethan. His expression, usually calm and confident, was drained of all color. His eyes were wide with fear. He saw them too. We stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, neither of us daring to make a sound. I could now see slight movements, small shifts in posture, the subtle tilting of heads. These weren't illusions. These were people. Should we leave? Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. I had never heard him sound scared before. I could only nod. We didn't bother packing anything, just grabbed our car keys and wallets and started walking as quietly as possible toward the trail. With every step, I expected to hear footsteps behind us, but the forest remained eerily silent. The only sound was the rapid pounding of my heart in my ears. When we finally reached the car and drove away, we didn't say a word for several minutes. We went straight to the nearest police station and reported what had happened. But as we explained, it was clear the officers didn't believe us. A group of people just standing silently in the woods in the middle of the night. No reports of missing campers? No signs of criminal activity? They dismissed our concerns with polite skepticism, saying we were probably just spooked by shadows or wildlife. Ethan and I weren't convinced. We thought about the random objects we had seen at the campsite, the abandoned gear left behind by who knows how many people before us. Had they seen the figures too? Had they left in a hurry like we did? Or worse, had they never made it out? We never got any answers. And we never went camping again. Two years ago, in the middle of spring, I took a break from work to go on a solo camping trip near a secluded lake in the mountains of Oregon. I had been to this spot a few times before with friends, but this time, I wanted to experience the solitude of nature on my own. The hike to the lake took around 2 hours, mostly following a flat trail surrounded by towering pines. The crisp air and the distant sound of birds chirping made the journey peaceful, and I was looking forward to unwinding after weeks of stress at work. Upon reaching the lake, I picked a spot slightly away from the water, nestled between the trees, to set up my tent and gear. It was already late in the afternoon, so I wasted no time preparing everything. Once my small camp was ready, I settled into my chair, popped open a beer, and took in the serene atmosphere. The gentle ripple of the water, the rustling leaves, and the occasional distant hoot of an owl made me feel at ease. As the sun started to dip below the horizon, I built a small campfire. Nighttime in the woods had always been my favorite part of camping. It was quiet, peaceful, and almost meditative. But something about this night felt different. There was an unsettling stillness in the air, and an eerie sensation began creeping up my spine, as if I were being watched. I glanced around, scanning the darkness beyond the fire's glow. The dense trees cast long, shifting shadows, making it difficult to tell if something, or someone, was lurking beyond. It wasn't like me to get paranoid in the woods, but this feeling of unease wouldn't go away. Despite not seeing anything, my instincts told me I wasn't alone. Trying to shake off the feeling, I focused on my thoughts, distracting myself with personal matters. It worked for a while, and I let the fire crackle in the background as I lost myself in contemplation. Hours passed, and by now it must have been close to 11 p.m. when I heard it, a loud, sudden crack. It sounded like a heavy footstep breaking a thick branch, coming from the darkness ahead of me. The noise echoed through the trees, sending a shiver through my body. My breath caught in my throat as I peered into the blackness beyond my firelight, but I couldn't see anything. My mind raced with possibilities. A bear? A deer? Or worse, a person? The uncertainty made my pulse quicken. I slowly reached for my can of bear spray and gripped it tightly. Then hesitantly I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" Silence. Not even the sound of an animal moving through the underbrush. The woods had gone unnaturally quiet, as if everything was holding its breath. That's when I realized, if it had been an animal, I would have heard more movement, the sound of twigs snapping under its weight or the rustling of leaves. But there was nothing. Someone, or something, was standing completely still, listening. Watching. A cold dread washed over me. My eyes darted toward my backpack, remembering that I had packed a flashlight. Keeping my movements slow and deliberate, I reached for it, my fingers fumbling to turn it on. When the beam of light finally cut through the darkness, my heart nearly stopped. At the very edge of the flashlight's reach, just beyond the tree line, stood a figure. A man. He was tall, unnaturally tall, at least 6 feet 5 inches, maybe taller. The moment the light touched him, he moved, retreating further into the darkness, just beyond my sight. My grip on the flashlight tightened as my mind reeled. How long had he been standing there? Was he the one who made the sound earlier? And more importantly, why was he watching me? Adrenaline kicked in, and my instincts screamed at me to leave. Without hesitation, I started tearing down my tent, shoving my belongings haphazardly into my backpack. I didn't care if I left something behind. I just needed to get out of there. My hands trembled as I worked, my ears straining for any sound that he was coming closer. Once my gear was packed, I scanned the area one last time with my flashlight. The man was gone, but I knew better than to think he had left. He was out there, hidden in the darkness, waiting. Clutching my flashlight and bear spray, I bolted in the opposite direction of where I had last seen him, making my way back toward the trail that led to my car. My heart pounded with every step, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I didn't dare look back. I just kept moving, convinced that if I did, I would see him following me. After what felt like an eternity, I finally reached the dirt road where my car was parked. My shaking hands fumbled with the keys as I unlocked the door and practically threw myself inside. I locked the doors, started the engine, and sped off, leaving the silent, watching trees behind me. As I drove down the deserted road, my mind raced with questions. Who was he? What was he doing out there? And why had he been watching me? The more I thought about it, the more disturbing the possibilities became. If he had bad intentions, why didn't he attack me right away? Why wait? The only thing I could think of was that he had been observing me, maybe waiting for the right moment, perhaps until I had gone to sleep. When I finally got home, I sat in my car for a long time, just breathing, trying to convince myself that it was over. But something had changed in me that night. I still go camping, but it has never been the same. Every rustling leaf, every snapped twig in the distance sends a jolt of fear through me. I always feel like I'm being watched, like there's someone, just beyond the trees, standing in the darkness waiting. Maybe it's just paranoia. Maybe it's just my imagination. But deep down, I know the truth. That night, in the woods, I wasn't alone. And I don't think I ever will be again. This happened a few years ago, back in 2016. I live in a small, wooded town surrounded by dense forests, with plenty of remote campgrounds within driving distance. I had a long weekend off from work and decided to go on a solo camping trip to one of these lesser-known spots for a quiet and peaceful getaway. The campground I chose was small and relatively isolated. There was a small dirt lot where campers could park, with 3 designated sites to set up tents. Each site had a fire pit, a worn-down bench, and an old grill. When I arrived, all the spots were empty, and there were no other vehicles around. I chose the campsite on the far left, gathered my gear, and walked about 5 minutes into the woods to set up my tent. After setting up my tent and unpacking my supplies, I sat on a log, taking in the sounds of nature. The site was deep in the woods, giving me a sense of solitude. It was about an hour later when I realized I hadn't planned any specific activities. Maybe there was a hiking trail nearby. I decided to head back to the entrance to check. When I returned to the parking lot, I noticed another vehicle had arrived. It was an old, rusted blue sedan with visible dents and scratches. One detail stood out immediately. It didn't have a license plate on the front or back. It struck me as odd, but I figured the owner might have been camping at one of the other sites. Since there was no visible trail, I turned around and headed back to my camp. About 10 minutes after returning to my campsite, I heard footsteps behind me. Turning around, I saw a man walking down the trail towards me. He had no backpack or gear, and his eyes were fixed on me like he was deliberately approaching to talk. The man looked to be in his mid-30s, but his disheveled appearance made him seem older. His dark green jacket was full of holes and stains, and his hair and beard were messy and unkempt. "Hey, you wouldn't happen to be able to help me with something real quick, would you?" he asked. Having nothing better to do, I nodded and stood up. But before I could even ask what he needed help with, he quickly said, "Thanks, not right now, but I'll come back in a little bit when I'm ready." Then, without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away. His behavior struck me as a little odd. Why come to ask for help if he wasn't ready yet? I figured he just needed to unpack first. Expecting him to return soon, I sat back down and waited. Time passed. 30 minutes, then an hour. By then, the sun had started to set, and I figured he must have taken care of whatever he needed on his own. 2 hours later, I had completely forgotten about the encounter. I had my campfire going and was preparing dinner when I suddenly heard footsteps again. I turned around, but it was too dark to see much. The footsteps crunched against the gravel, growing louder as they approached. Slowly, the man stepped into the light of my campfire. It was the same guy. "Hey, you ready?" "I still need a little help," he said, his voice casual but slightly off-putting. With what exactly?" I asked, now feeling uneasy. He smiled. "It'll only take a minute." "You don't look busy," he joked. Something about his tone was pushy, and he avoided answering my question directly. My social awkwardness got the best of me. Instead of saying no, I hesitantly agreed. He grinned again and turned to lead the way. As we moved away from my campfire, it struck me how dark it was. The man didn't have a flashlight, and neither did I. The deeper we went, the more unsettling the situation became. "So, what exactly do you need help with?" I asked again. He slowed his pace, as if about to answer, but then remained silent and kept walking. My gut twisted. Something wasn't right. A chilling stillness surrounded us, the kind that felt unnatural. I instinctively slowed down, trying to put some distance between us without making it obvious. I had only stepped back a few feet when he suddenly stopped and turned to face me. His grin was gone, replaced by a cold, emotionless expression. He stared at me, then slowly reached into his jacket. I caught a glimpse of something metallic. Without hesitation, I turned and sprinted into the woods. I could hear him running after me, his heavy steps crashing against the ground. I didn't dare look back. My only focus was getting away. After a solid 2 minutes of running, his footsteps faded. My lungs burned, and my heart pounded in my chest. I hid behind a thick tree, trying to control my breathing. I had my phone and keys in my pocket, thank God. Hands shaking, I dialed 911 and whispered my location to the dispatcher. By the time law enforcement arrived at the camping grounds, only my truck was there. The blue sedan was gone. The man had vanished. I gave the police a full description of him and his vehicle, but they didn't seem hopeful. Without a plate number or solid evidence, there wasn't much they could do. It was clear to me what almost happened that night. He had been watching me, planning something sinister. The way he had approached me earlier in the day, then waited until nightfall, showed he was calculating. The realization sent a chill down my spine. Had I gone with him any further, I might not have made it back. Since that night, camping has never felt the same. The woods, once a place of peace and solitude, now feel like a place where unseen eyes might be lurking, waiting for their next target. I still go on camping trips, but I'm never truly at ease. And I always trust my gut when something feels wrong.